Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked, locked, blissed? Dr. Shealy, are you blissed?
Yes, but tired of lack of sunshine as I am. It's the cloudiest summer I can remember.
Really? Okay, well, out here, they've stopped, most of the spraying of the chemtrails. And the sun is drilling right through us. But yeah, yesterday was pretty cloudy. And we're in a drought. Well, the soil's cracking again. And so, an example of that is we water the tomatoes and then the inside of the tomato grows faster than the skin and then the skins crack. Are you experiencing that as well or
yeah,
not?
I see some of it, yes.
Yeah. So what's new in the world of Dr. Shealy?
Just the daily activities of life.
Yeah.
Surviving the pan-stupidemic.
It's interesting, Dr. Shealy. If I refer to the good old days, let's say before January of this year, I used to get, if I use the term the good old days, that's what I mean. So, 8 months ago or more, I used to get emails and there would be jokes and cartoons and all kinds of, emails that I really didn't want to see. I mean, my email box would get clogged up with that kind of stuff. And I noticed that is no longer the case. And the reason I'm bringing this up is, number one, I was wondering if you're finding the same thing in your circles. And is this an indication that Americans are less happy, less having less fun? And I'll explain why I'm saying that. Back in the 1980s, there was a guy, and he went from company to company to company, and he looked at which companies were the most successful. And then he went into the cafeterias of those companies. And he noticed that the ones where people are laughing and scratching and having fun and, the cafeteria noise of the corporate cafeteria correlated to the more fun people were having, the louder the cafeterias were, the better the company seemed to do because the people loved it there, compared to the cafeterias where people were quiet and somber and they had their head down and they just ate. Kind of like the difference between a prison and a party. Okay? That would be the distinction. And I'm wondering if the same kind of thing is happening with emails, with the indicator being less fun, less, nuisance. And actually, they're a nuisance getting all these jokes because you get the same joke from like 12 people. But do you think there's a correlation there with people really being bummed out? The whole country.
I don't think there's any question about that. You don't need a fake news to tell you that people do not like this kind of change without purpose.
Change without purpose, yeah. At least the purpose that is visible to the typical person, wondering why this is happening. I mean, we know they want to kill us. We know that they think there are too many of us, and so forth. But that's something we've been talking about for at least as long as we've been on the air. So, Dr. Shealy, it's very difficult to figure out exactly what's happening because, we read the numbers are increasing. Then we read the curve is flattening. I mean, Only the government would come up with a term like the curve is flattening. And then we read that the hospitals are inflating the numbers because they want more money per head. They want more money per ventilator. And then we read that the hospitals are deflating the numbers because they don't want people to realize how bad it is, and that people will stop going to the hospital because they feel they'll get infected if they go to the hospital. So we've read both sides of pretty much every bit of data and information that's out there. So what we have to do for ourselves is, because there's so many lies and because no one seems to really be concerned about the truth, or very few, we have to figure it out for ourselves. So that brings me to the point where some people are recommending, Jared Kushner is saying that he and his wife are going to send their three young children back to school amid the COVID-19, what they call the pandemic. So Jared Kushner says he and his wife are going to send their three children back to school. But their children are not going to, if you read a little more into this, the White House senior advisor, Jared Kushner, has three school-age children, all of whom attend the Milton Gottesman Jewish Day School in Washington, D.C. So he's going to send his children there. But if you read further, they're not going to exactly open up the way school was taught in the good old days. They are going to be opening on a less than full-time basis, and most or almost all of the schoolwork will continue to be done remotely, which really means he's going to send his children to school, but they're not going. I mean, that's how I read it, or they're hardly going.
That's average doublespeak.
It is. So here, the average guy who reads the headline says, and the headline says, quote, Jared Kushner says he has no fear about sending his, quote, kids back to school. Okay? And amid the COVID-19 pandemic, saying children have a 6 times higher chance of dying from the flu, end quote. Now, is that true? That children have a 6 times higher chance of dying from the flu than of COVID-19? Could that be true, Dr. Shealy?
Nothing that has been talked about in the entire stupid epidemic has had any fact behind it and any non-discrimination. In other words, the death rate, the fertility rate, the infection rate, nothing is known. I wouldn't trust the CDC to tell me the time of day.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, all right. So, Dr. Shealy, we have children, and you have children, and you have grandchildren. All things being considered, with your medical experience, with your experience as a father, with your experience in life, putting everything together, the sociological, the medical, the education, all the benefits and disbenefits of sending children to school today, do you have an opinion whether you would or would not, if your children were to attend the public training camp at the local public school in your area? Would you send them, or do you have an opinion, or not?
I would send them. And, of course, I would send them with their adequate D3 and other supplies.
Okay. Now, would you volunteer to be, well, let's assume these children are young, let's say elementary school or high school. Would you volunteer to be on some kind of a school board committee to advise as to what to do to minimize the risks of your children being infected?
Yes, but I'd have to start doing a lot of studying because I don't know how to find the right answers.
Right. I understand that. And so I'm sure in every school district there are at least a few people with medical experience, real medical experience, that could do that could help the school system figure out what to do. And so do you think that social distancing, the term that they're using to keep people separated, is that a positive, or just forget about that? Just go back to the good old days. What are your thoughts on that? Put the desks farther apart?
I think that the answer is unknowable. and that in reality undoable in a public school situation.
Okay. Well, I used to teach in a public school system. I used to be a computer consultant, so I spent a lot of hours in the system. And here's what I've noticed: that in the elementary school, it is almost impossible to have a class. If you say, "Okay, class, we're going to leave the classroom and we're going to go to the boys' room and the girls' room. So line up." And that's what they do. Okay, line up at the door and everybody's all in a line, and then they march down the hallway. Now, it's impossible to have the children walk down the hallway without a bunch of them putting their hands on the walls, touching doorknobs, touching the bulletin board, touching objects on the way to the boys' room and girls' room. It's impossible. And it's mostly the boys that have to do this, but they can't seem to not do that. And if you were to say, boys and girls, whatever you do, don't touch your face, I would say within 3 minutes, half of them would be scratching their face.
Very observable.
Yeah, it is. So what I'm saying is there's a whole new protocol that needs to be taught, right? How to wash one's hands. That needs to be taught at the, obviously at before school, meaning before age 5, but in the homes. And then it needs to be reinforced with scientific information at the earliest level in elementary school. Like, oh, these are germs. Here's a petri dish, right? And let's just take some scrapings from our fingernails and put it in the petri dish and close it and let's see what happens. Let's just touch our face and with our finger after we washed our hands and touched the petri dish. I mean, so many things we could do to prove that there's a reason why you should wash your hands and not touch your face. What recommendations do you have, Dr. Shealy, for parents regarding sending their children to school, if you would, and I believe you said you would send your children to school?
Yeah. Well, I believe in general that if we just follow the usual precautions, if the child has a fever, a cough, something, don't send them to school. But be sure they get adequate vitamin D3. And to me, that means starting by age 1 or 2, I would give that child 50,000 units once a month. And by the time they get to, let's say, early teens, depending upon their weight, it would go to either 3 times a month or once a week. Because that's what an adult needs to stay healthy. In addition, I'd be certain that they got at least 4 of my youth formulas for the vitamin C and MSM. And finally, of course, by the time they're 10 years old, at least 1 a day of Dr. Stevens' Essentials. Those are the foundation for helping your immune system in a good situation.
Now, what age was that for the one of Dr. Shealy's Essentials, which is your multivitamin? What age was that?
Oh, about 1 or 2 years.
Age 1 or age 2?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Dr. Shealy and I'll be right back. We're talking about what you need to consider should you send your children back to school. Professor, talking with Dr. Norman Shealy, medical doctor, surgeon, and we're talking about COVID-19 and back to school. His thoughts on whether you should or shouldn't. We're going to be discussing, and things you can do to improve your chances of staying healthy, which Dr. Shealy has talked about many, many times over the years. Vitamin D3, vitamin C with MSM, and a multivitamin. And Dr. Shealy, in England, there's a company in Northampton, England, and they make sandwiches. It's a sandwich factory. They have about 2,100 employees. Of those 2,100 employees, about 1,300 of them have been tested for COVID-19. Of the 1,300 who have been tested, 292 tested positive. So roughly, the way I'm looking at this is about half the employees have been tested, and a quarter of them have tested positive for COVID-19, and they're making sandwiches, fresh sandwiches. So the next question is, if we extrapolate this and continue on with this to the school cafeteria. Now, some of these people had no symptoms at all that tested positive. So if we have people in the cafeteria who are making hamburgers, French fries, whatever else desserts, vegetables, fruit, milk, putting milk cartons on the out for the students to pick out. If that's the case, what would you recommend that the students do, if anything at all, regarding food with cafeteria workers and food supplies that we really have no idea if they are positive for COVID-19 or not?
Oh, wow. Now there's no way to know that.
Yeah.
Whether it's prepared inside or outside the cafeteria, there's no way of really regulating that in a way that is totally safe. No way.
Yes,
is encourage all people who work there, they begin to have a symptom, stay home.
Yeah, I have to agree, Dr. Shealy, that this is an invisible. This is like leprosy in some ways, but you can't see it. You don't know who the carriers are, and the carriers might not even know who they are, and their family. So what could happen is a child could go to school, become infected, and bring it home to mom and dad, and maybe they are scaling down and saving money, and they have their grandmother and grandfather, or aunts and uncles or cousins, living with them. So there's a lot to think about. And Dr. Shealy, then, would you recommend that people eat specific foods and not eat other specific foods? And I'm talking about considering everything. I'm considering health, the foods that, would be the best in terms of nutrition. But then some of the foods that might be the best in terms of nutrition might be the riskiest to eat because of the handling of them, in the cafeteria at school.
This is the time when I would make the school lunch for each child and send it with them from home.
Okay. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. So, class, if you're going to send your children to school, it seems like the safest thing that you can do, if you are healthy, is to send your child to school with his or her own lunch. His or her own, including the drink. Okay? Now, that probably doesn't mean soda. That probably means something like juice. And
I strongly recommend apple juice or plain water.
Just as an interesting side note, Dr. Shealy, my dad, as you've, I'm sure, heard, was a school principal. And there was a young boy that came into his school system, and he was a foreigner. He came from another country. And one of the teachers came into his office and said, that new student we have is drinking wine in the elementary school cafeteria. Did you know that? And my father said, really? So my father went to, check it out. And sure enough, this young boy was drinking wine that he brought from home with his lunch and thought nothing of it. And what his parents did was they mixed 50% wine and 50% water because that's what they did where they came from. And there was nothing different about it. So, Dr. Shealy, as I was mentioning, my dad had a student in his school. And this young student's parents mixed wine and water 50-50. And that was his beverage to take to school because that was the custom. And I have a feeling it was the custom because the alcohol in the water helped kill the bacteria wherever they came from. Does that make sense to you?
It does make sense, but it does worry me. I presume it was about a pint of mixture.
Yeah. So the quantity of alcohol,
Yeah, that's quite a bit of alcohol for a school agent.
Right. But it wasn't vodka, and it wasn't whiskey, and it wasn't scotch. It was wine. So, yeah. Interestingly, my parents, when I was growing up, said, this is the liquor cabinet. If you want some, go ahead. You can have all you want. But you have to have it home. And because of that, it was always there. It was no big deal. Now for some of my friends, it was a big deal because their parents said, don't you even think about this. So I didn't care for it. And it was no big deal for me. And there was no reason to, to try to have it. So even to this day, I, very rarely have,
now when I was 16, going off to college, my father said, if you won't smoke or drink until you're 21, I'm going to give you $1,000. He couldn't pay me $20,000 to smoke. But, of course, he did. He paid off when I was 21, and I had not smoked or drank. He gave me $1,000.
I had a German Shepherd when I was growing up. His name was Giacomo Puccini. And so we called him we just called him Puccini. And, so I had a friend who smoked, and I was wondering what the dog thought of it. So I asked him if I could bring a cigarette near the dog's nose, and the dog, I couldn't get Puccini to smoke. He wouldn't do it. He was smart enough. And, so maybe there's some things that we can learn from German Shepherds and other dogs. Dr. Shealy, the bottom of the hour news, there was a piece talking about a shortage. And that shortage was something that hits the pizza joints, and that would be pepperoni. Pepperoni is currently in short supply, and the reason for that is because it takes effort to make pepperoni. It's not just as simple as making hamburger meat. There's all kinds of spices involved, and so it's more labor intensive, and it costs more per pound than chopped meat. So it's in short supply. Because the people who make it, there aren't enough of them. They've been sent home. So we're going to see shortages in all kinds of things. And we already have. Of course, we've seen, toilet paper and soap and those kinds of things. So I just wanted to bring that out. Any comments about the pepperoni, the current pepperoni shortage across the United States?
Well,
Dr. Shealy?
Every day you have many, many choices. And if it's a question of eating healthy or unhealthy, well, to me, I eat healthy. There's no pepperoni, I don't eat it. It's that kind of thing. What you substitute would be a book worth of stuff to try to find something as a substitute. So I just suggest find an alternative.
Mm-hmm. Now, when I make pizza, I will take a large onion and I'll slice that and put it on the top. I mean, a large onion. I mean, I would probably cover a pizza with as much onion, fresh onion, as others might use pepperoni.
Right.
Probably, in terms of weight, I'd certainly be more onion. Okay? And green peppers, and jalapeno peppers, and all kinds of peppers, and no sausage. I mean, the boys here at the house call those lips and rear ends. That's what they call sausages. And I don't want lips, noses, and rear ends on my food. So I don't eat sausage. And I think there's an old expression, Dr. Shealy, that there's two things in life you don't want to see made. One is sausage, and the other is laws. Have you heard that?
I've heard it at least once, but it is not a common expression.
Yeah, you don't want to see sausage and laws made because I guess both are disgusting. Okay, and I understand that there's a possibility, and let's just consider this a rumor at this point, but possibility that the price of cheese is going to go up as well because it takes effort to make cheese, and it takes time to make cheese, and some of the processing companies that make it have shut down or reduced the employees, so less cheese, higher price. So there's all kinds of things happening, as in the marketplace as a result of the corona panic, as I referred to it, which I considered from day one to be worse than the coronavirus, meaning it would be more disruptive and lots more people would die as a result of the lack of supplies, the lack of nutrition, the lack of medicine, the lack of everything. So one of the things that we talked about, Dr. Shealy, on USA Prepares for months now, and actually for years now, but specifically, we've been warning people that this was coming, and here it is. So in California, there have been fires. And whether they were intentionally set because of faulty equipment or nature, I don't know. But what we do know is that two things are happening. Fires in California, and also the grid has been shut down in what has been called rolling blackouts. Now, we said this was going to happen. We said there'd be rolling blackouts and rolling brownouts, and blackouts and brownouts. Okay? So a blackout is no electricity. A brownout is not enough electricity, or a reduced amount of electricity, so that the lights would be dim and motors would have a tough time starting up. Electric motors like compressors and refrigeration types of equipment. That being the case, there are more rolling blackouts in California, and that means that the utility company has been shutting off the electricity. So they'll have areas, let's say area 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. They'll say, okay, area 1, no electricity for a while. They'll shut the electricity off for everybody in that area. And then they'll shut down area 2 and bring back area 1. Then they'll shut down they'll bring back area 2 and they'll shut down area 3 and so forth. And that's what a rolling blackout is. Not enough electricity. So you all get this, what you used to get, but not as many people are getting it. Not as many businesses. That being the case, that means air conditioning is going to be shut off, whether you like it or not. And you're not getting a notice. They're not going to tell you, okay, so at 3 o'clock on Tuesday, the electricity is going to be shut off for X number of hours. You just get your electricity shut off and there's no warning. So while that's happening, Dr. Shealy, do you have any suggestions to go into a really hot environment, because the weather is getting hotter? We hit 130 degrees in Death Valley over the last couple of days. Do you have any suggestions as to what people should do to prepare their bodies in advance for that instantaneous air conditioning shutoff?
Well, obviously that's something that is very individual because of our entire physiology. On the other hand, there are some people who don't like heat, period. I mean, when it gets above 70 degrees, they're uncomfortable. And others who prefer it when it's 90 or above. So there are our individual aspects. I mean, I grew up in South Carolina, which is hot, y'all, and I've never minded heat. So I'm okay at 100 degrees. I don't require air conditioning, although I would work better in an office with it. And I do like my bedroom air conditioned. But without it, well, I would survive.
I remember back in the 1960s without, growing up without air conditioning, and the windows would be open and it would be hot. And sometimes it was so hot and humid it was impossible to sleep. And in Virginia, there were some old homes that were built, and they had sleeping porches. Now, I'm talking about homes that were built in the Old South. I'm talking the 1840s, 1850s, even 1820s. And those homes for the wealthy had 2 stories. And the idea was that people would sleep on the second story porch, okay? No screens. And the reason they would sleep on the second story rather than out in the yard is because of the bugs. And the bugs don't seem to like to fly up, above, let's say, 15 feet. So they would be free from most of the bugs flying, bothering them all night. And it would be cooler outside than inside because the house would, the roof would heat up and they didn't have much insulation. So the idea was to get outside and sleep outside under the stars. And you could sleep in the rain if you had a roof over the porch. And I'm talking about these kind of not quite wraparound porches, but large, long porches. So the whole family would be out there sleeping. And that's the way it was because there was no such thing as refrigeration, compressors, Freon, and so forth. It just didn't exist. So can we do it? The answer is yes, we can. Is it fun? Not so much. Not so much. But if there is a blackout, Dr. Shealy, is there a way that is there, less salt, more salt, less minerals, more hydration, and what kind of hydration? Is there something that we could do to have our bodies ready for that instantaneous shift from, let's say, 78 degrees of air conditioning inside to no air conditioning, where the temperature might hit 90, 95 inside?
I think it's important for people to get accustomed to sweating. And so I would suggest that people who don't like it get accustomed to taking a soak in their bathtub with just moderately hot water, nothing else in it necessarily. Get accustomed to sweating. Actually, I take a soak about 4 afternoons a week with some magnesium chloride crystals, and I just really like that 30 to 40 minutes after the soak to cool off. It prepares your body for normal ups and downs.
Yeah. And, the farm life class, for those of you who live on a farm, you know this. You're inside, you're in a tractor, and sometimes the tractors, if you're fortunate, you have a tractor with air conditioning, that's wonderful. But lots of tractors don't have air conditioning, and most of ours do not. And I have to fix our air conditioning system on the tractor every time I want to use it. Every time. Not some of the time, but every time, because I can't find the leaks, and so I'll lose some refrigerant each time I use it. So I'll have to fix the air conditioning system. And that's because it's so hot when you're behind a 100 horsepower engine roaring in the heat of the day when you're baling hay. It's hot outside anyway. But then to be bathed in a gust, a nonstop gust of radiator heat from that roaring engine, it's a lot. It's a lot to bear. So air conditioning is required in that kind of environment, in that kind of heat. But the other tractors, you just get on them, and they don't produce as much heat, and you can ride around for a long time in the sun. But farming is in the sun, out of the sun, in the cold, out of the cold, and those changes of temperature. And we're used to that, and we're used to carrying heavy things, but not everybody is, Dr. Shealy. So that gets us back to exercise. How do we get started for those who just lift nothing heavier than a pencil? What do they do? And can you share that with us when we come back? Dr. Norm Shealy is with us. Website, normshealy.com, NORMSHEALY.com, normshealy.com. Dr. Shealy, for those who aren't used to lifting much things heavier than a pencil, have these jobs where they press keys and click mice on the screen, what is the best way for them to get into exercising and preparing for power outages, extreme changes in temperature, that kind of thing, when they're used to working in an air-conditioned environment? Now they're home sitting in air conditioning. I
have had, I make
what should they do?
On YouTube for 20 years, Bounce, B-O-U-N-C-E, with Dr. Shealy. It is one of the best things you could do for your heart and your body as a whole. Takes no effort, no special equipment. Just stand in place, slightly bend your knees up and down, and then you raise your arms straight down to straight up over and over again. Music conductors live longer than any other professional. Moving the arms that way, and then just a little less a movement of your legs is actually building up to 30 minutes, 5 days a week, is adequate exercise.
I believe I heard music conductors live longer than any other profession. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. And it makes a lot of sense, because when I go for a fast walk, if I'm going to go, let's say pick up the mail, for example, I can dilly-dally. I can go slowly. It's a third of a mile walk each way. I can get distracted and just look around and stop. Or I can swing my arms forward and backward and walk quickly. And that's what I try to do. I try to raise my heart rate, try to improve my circulation. And that's what I do. And so based on what you just said, I think I'm going to keep my arms out sideways, and forward and backward, and in complete articulation of my arms, to further improve my circulation. But What about a brisk walk versus a slow-paced walk?
Definitely better. No question about it. 30 minutes of brisk walking is equal to 4 hours of non-brisk walking.
And so, Dr. Shealy, when a person goes to the hospital and lies down in that bed for, 3 or 4 days, how long does it take to recover the muscle that was lost by just not using the muscles?
Well, it depends on what you do and how quickly you do it, but it could take you several months. And I would definitely say you need to start moving adequately as soon as possible.
And why is it that when a person's in a hospital, the nurse will come in and say, okay, time to get up, depending on what you're in for. But they don't, even after you've had surgery, they want you moving within a day, right?
Absolutely.
And what happens if a person just lies around and doesn't get out of bed? Oh, it's so hard to get up.
3 to 5 times as long to recover.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what about what kind of diseases can you get by just lounging around and not moving much? I'm talking about watching television, lying down.
Osteoporosis would be at the top of my list.
Osteoporosis?
Osteoporosis, lack of bone.
Mm-hmm.
Early fractures.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
You need certain pressure to keep your bones normally mineralized. And for those who won't do it, there are small mini trampolines that works well. And then my favorite is now the vibrating machines. They call various things vibrating pads and other such things. But you can buy an excellent one for $250 now. And that is excellent to prevent and restore our normal bone.
My wife, when her grandmother was alive, lived in an old Victorian house, probably built somewhere around, it had many stages of construction, but I would say the most part, maybe 1840, maybe 1844. And this house had really tall ceilings, like let's say 12 feet, 14-foot ceilings. And so the second floor was a lot of stairs going up to the second floor. And her grandmother attributed her good health to having the bedroom on the second floor. So even when she was in her 90s, she would walk, up and down the stairs every day. And it was a lot of stairs. Do you think there's logic there? Do you think that's true? I do.
Absolutely. No question.
Mm-hmm. And her grandmother ate food that she prepared. I mean, back then, people were born in the 1890s or so, were used to canning their own food, growing their own food. And the generation that raised them absolutely had to do that. You couldn't just go buy whatever you wanted. You had to raise it. So they lived a really healthy lifestyle. And I think we've forgotten a lot about that. All right, Dr. Shealy and I'll be right back after the top of the hour commercial announcements. And I'll tell you a little bit about the temperature in Death Valley just for a very short time. And I have a question about shaving. Should men shave before going out in public or not because of the coronavirus? Everyone all set, cocked, locked, blissed? Hour number 2 of USA Prepares with Dr. Norm Shealy, medical doctor. Dr. Shealy, in Death Valley, California, it's one of the hottest places on the planet. I just wanted to mention that in the last couple of days, it has hit 130 degrees, 130. And there are plenty of other places that are really, really hot. And there are extreme droughts in these states right now. Oregon, California, not completely, just areas that have extreme drought conditions. Oregon, California, Nevada, New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona, and Utah, to name just a few. So just a word to the wise, prepare for blackouts, brownouts. Make sure you have plenty of hydration, and make sure you are exercising and able to survive what's coming. And we don't know exactly where it's going to be, and we don't know exactly when it's going to be, but you can be pretty darn sure that the power grid is going to be more and more unstable over time, because there are people putting greater demands on the power grid by doing a couple things. One, they're working from home. So during the day, instead of being at work, they're at home. So they're using their home air conditioning. They're using their home lighting. They're using more of the internet than ever before. And it's taxing the power grid. And it's hotter. So we put all it together, and it's not a good scenario for the grid being really stable and robust. It's not. And then you have people who think electric cars are the way to go. And when they start plugging in their electric cars for charging, the grid absolutely positively was not designed for that. That will push us right over the edge. It cannot be done. Without expanding the grid, electric cars cannot be charged at the rate that people seem to think they want electric cars. So I just wanted to share that with you. Dr. Shealy, any comments about that?
Another stupido. You know, let's face it, common sense is the uncommon commodity. And here's one where logic is beyond expectation.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Shealy, colloidal silver, people have been using it for years. As a matter of fact, born with a silver spoon in his mouth is probably one of the terms that addressed silver and the beneficial uses of silver compared to a wooden spoon that was filled with bacteria, or just a regular iron spoon from, let's say, the Civil War era or the War of Northern Aggression era. Dr. Shealy, do we know how colloidal silver works? Do we know what it does? Do we know how it targets certain pathogens in the body and not others? Do we know that or not?
Well, there's no question that silver seems to kill many bacteria, fungi, and possibly, although the proof there is not quite as excellent, viruses. And
right.
In general, it is remarkably safe, although if you take too much of it a long period of time, it can turn your skin into a funny color that is called argyria.
Now, if your skin turns that bluish color, have you damaged anything, or is it just you're stuck now being blue and you're not going to get back to that?
And it would take a complete biochemical profile to try to determine how much, if any.
Okay. Do we know, let me ask this way. Does colloidal silver only target bad fungi and bad bacteria, or does it kill it all?
It doesn't kill it all, and it definitely does not kill, in general, normal bacteria. You know,
okay.
gut has.
So is it done? Is it selective based on the electron configuration chemically? Is that how it does it? I mean, how would it know? How would it know that we're going to get this?
Yeah, I don't know that answer. You're over my head.
I don't know anybody who knows that answer. I really don't. I've never seen anywhere written an answer that says colloidal silver works exactly this way. It is like a bullet that only will connect with these pathogens, these bacteria, these fungi, but not the others. The others seem to have an armor plating, and it doesn't affect them. I've never seen anything, and maybe my research is incomplete, but I've never seen an answer to that question.
Right.
That's why I asked. Okay. Here's a kind of an open-ended question, Dr. Shealy, and there are lots of ways this thing could go. It could go nuclear. It could go chemical. It could go biological. It could go sociological. It could go thermal. There's so many ways this can go. And the question that I have for you is, based on all of your experience, do you have a greatest concern going forward? Is there like a number one? This is like the worst thing that we have done, can do, or hopefully we can avoid this because it's so bad. Do you have a feeling for what that is in your experience, in your world?
Well, yes, I do. I believe the potential is number one, and that is a virtual total destruction of everything as we know it. But I think we are in the midst of a giant political power play worldwide. And it's not just in this country, it's worldwide. I have to presume that includes the Committee of 300, et cetera. It depends on the outcome. I think we have a 50-50 chance of surviving November.
And so your greatest concern is of this political nature and the pending stupidity that may follow, or lack of common sense. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Power grab?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And that has tentacles into virtually everything. That has tentacles into the electric grid, the food supply, medicine, education, even entertainment. It's all connected to that central focal point, I guess, the Committee of 300.
Yeah. Vince,
when you think of, yes,
in 1999, I think it cost $15,000 to $20,000 diesel generator, and it was the big thing. When they were predicting all kinds of problems in 99, 2000. We used it once for 2 weeks when the grid didn't go out for that long, and we were able to function with a refrigerator and a stove and a little bit of electric heat. But in a long-term situation, how good is even the most sophisticated diesel generator?
Okay. I think I can address some of that. So you live on a farm, and we do. And when we lived in Virginia on a farm, I was very concerned about that because that was the 1999s going into the year 2000 Y2K era, and there was a huge concern. There was a huge concern that the computers would fail on many, many levels, if not all levels, because the date would not roll over in the BIOS, the basic input-output system of the PC, the personal computer. And although the personal computer didn't run everything, it sure did run a lot. For example, it was involved in, and I built computers that did this, so I know for a fact what I'm speaking of. I was a computer consultant back then, and I was one of the guys who prepared our customers, and there are lots of them, to survive Y2K. So for a fact, I can tell you that Y2K was real. The computers, absolutely positively, not all of them would roll the date over to January 1, 2000. Okay? They were stuck. And that was a shortcoming in the original design of the basic input-output operating system of the computer. And this is called firmware. This is software that is permanently installed in a chip or in an integrated circuit. Okay? So it's called the BIOS chip. Those computers would not roll the date over. Now, what would that mean? That means that insurance policies that were running on those computers would not go to the year 2000. That meant that accounting systems, payroll systems, would not process payroll in the year 2000 after the first day of the year 2000. And the hospital systems that would order inventory, bandages, syringes, medicines, etc., they wouldn't work either. Now, the reason I know all this is because I built those systems for those kinds of customers. The dental offices, the scheduling system for dental offices wouldn't work either. Now, what I did was I patched all those and replaced the BIOS so that it would work. And that's how come we didn't have the Y2K collapse. But the generator component that you talked about was another piece of this. And the issue with generators, and I'll cut to the chase on that. Back then, we had two diesel generators. One was a 5 kilowatt, one was a 10 kilowatt system. And one was a 2-cylinder diesel, the other was a 4-cylinder diesel. They were military surplus generators. And they would run, the small one, the 5 kilowatt, would run on about a half a gallon of diesel fuel per hour, which was great. And it had a life expectancy of 8,000 hours. That's it. So you'd rebuild this thing after 8,000 hours. Now, it doesn't sound like a very long time, right? Well, in a generator, that is a long time, because the average big box store generator that you buy is only designed to last 30 days of continuous run. 30 days at 24 hours a day, changing the oil every day, so that it will last at least 30 days. But that's the design specifications for a generator. The bottom line with generators is a real simple problem: fuel. They use an enormous amount of fuel. There's nothing on the planet that will deliver more energy per dollar than the electric power grid. Nothing. If you had a generator, it will cost more to generate the same amount of electricity as the power grid, and it won't be anywhere near as reliable. But it sure is great compared to nothing. So the bottom line is, yes, we have had diesel generators, and we still have one here. Actually, we have a couple of them here, for the same reason that you have them, because we are absolutely positively dependent on electricity. Without electricity, the cows don't get watered in the drought, because the water comes from a well in the drought. Now, during rainy times, cows can drink out of the ponds, they can drink out of the streams, but in a drought, they can't. They will drain those ponds in a month. There'll be nothing left to drink, and they'll die. So water is critical, electricity is critical. Our society is completely dependent on electricity. And a diesel generator is the best choice. Second to that would be propane. Third would be gasoline, because of, there are a number of considerations, and I can go into that if you'd like, Dr. Shealy, but the bottom line is fuel. You're going to burn, whether it's gasoline or diesel or propane, you're going to burn between 1/2 gallon of fuel, regardless of which one it is, diesel, gasoline, or propane, per hour, or as much as 1 gallon per hour. That's 24 gallons a day. Most people aren't going to have even 1 day's worth of fuel. That's a huge problem. We'll be right back. Dr. Norm Shealy's with us, and Dr. Shealy asked me a question about generators, and just let me give you another little statistic. So, because the generators that you buy at the big box stores run at a wide open throttle, 3,600 RPM is running wide open throttle on those single cylinder gasoline engines. They run really, really hot. And literally they have a 30-day life expectancy. But you don't realize that. None of us does, because we don't run them 24 hours a day. What we do is we typically will start them and run them and shut them off. And that's the way you should do it. So how long would it last? 24 hours a day for 30 days would be 720 hours. Now, if you ran it 4 hours a day, that would be 180 days. That's half a year. Now, if you ran it only 2 hours a day, you could get that generator to last a whole year. Now, if you think about that, if you knew in advance that if you ran it 2 hours a day every day, it would only last a year, you'd never buy it, right? The reason that you haven't come to that conclusion, no one has, is because we haven't had to run them 2 hours a day for every day. Because the grid is pretty robust so far. But when it goes down and you lose that freezer and you lose that refrigerator and you lose, the ability to cook, then you realize, and lighting, and wells, then you realize that how dependent on electricity we are. So the only answer that I've been able to come up with that is better than that. Well, let me just go back for just a second. So I mentioned that our generator is rated for 8,000 hours. Now it has a big oil filter, has several fuel filters. It's diesel. It's air cooled, so it doesn't have a water pump. 8,000 hours would be 10 times longer than that big box generator that you get at, the big box store. And how much was it? I don't know. I think I paid different amounts for them, but roughly between, let's say, $1,400 and $1,200 when I paid for a used 30-year-old generator. So it costs more than a big box generator, and Dr. Shealy's costs more than that. But Dr. Shealy has a diesel, and it'll last 8,000 hours, and so does ours. So those are some of the thoughts about generators. But then what's the real answer? The real answer is there's only one that I can think of, and it's a combination. It's a hybrid system of a generator plus a solar panel plus battery backup. That's the best answer, but it's the most expensive answer. And it requires lots of maintenance on those batteries because every 2 months or so, we've got to put in our case, 10 gallons of distilled water every 2 months. So that means if we have our head screwed on right, we're going to have at least 100 gallons of distilled water available at any point in time. And if our head's really screwed on right, then what we're going to do is we're going to have our own system to distill water. We're going to be able to take, well water and distill it. Because eventually the stores are going to run out of distilled water, and then what good are the batteries if you can't get distilled water? And then the next thing is, how long will the electronics last of a solar system? Well, the panel should last about 25 years. So that's not a forever answer either. And how about the charge controller and the inverter? How long will the electronics last there? I don't know. I'm thinking maybe 15 years would be great. But the capacitors are going to quit, because they always do. So I run extra fans and extra cooling to keep all of our electronics, even beyond the electronic cooling fans that come with the systems. I've got other cooling fans to keep all the electronics running cooler, because heat is the enemy of semiconductors. Dr. Shealy, did I address what you were asking me, or did I completely miss the mark?
You did it.
I know that I went, off on a tangent, and
I think it's important for people to know this detail.
And it's complicated. You got a chance to see here at the farm the last time you were here that solar array, and well, Dr. Shealy, what was your reaction? You saw the battery bank, you saw the inverter, the charge controller, the electronics, and
wow.
You saw the solar panel.
Just wow.
Why do you say that, Dr. Shealy?
Well, I've seen the little ones that go on the roof of homes and stuff like that. And, just seeing this phenomenal array right there, right down practically to the ground, it's impressive.
Well, it was all homemade. Literally, it was homemade. And I'll tell you what, we'll address a little bit about that when we come back, and so that you can get a mental picture of what Dr. Shealy and I are talking about. And there is none like it on the internet. So if you go and you say, I'm sure it's there, and we'll just find one like it, and you go to solar array and images on the internet, there's nothing exactly like that. Nothing. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that when we come back. Class Dr. Norm Shealy is with us, normshealy.com, normshealy.com. If you're interested in buying some of his books, you can go there. If you're interested in his vitamins, mineral supplements, you can go to normshealy.com. That's where I go. And I think you'll be delighted with the offerings. Dr. Shealy, you're talking about the solar system. I just wanted to give our class a mental impression. So I went to the internet and I looked up solar images, and there's really nothing that looks exactly like what we have here at the farm. And the reason is because we built it from scratch. Now, you can buy, it looks like most people who have these solar arrays hire someone to install them, and we did not do that. We literally selected the materials, cut, designed, fabricated the whole thing ourselves, including the concrete piers that we mounted them on. And literally, class, what we did was we bought industrial shelving, used industrial shelving. So if you were to go to look up Home Depot lumber yard, lumber yard, you'll see pictures of their boards and plywood and 4x8 sheets that they sell on these heavy racks, the shelving. And that's what we used. Actually, it was even orange. Was used from Home Depot. We bought it from a company that buys out their store shelving when they take it down. And so it was used from Home Depot. And we cut this shelving and welded it and fabricated it into the array. So it's really, really strong. It's way stronger than anything else I've ever seen. And we've had almost 70-mile-an-hour winds, and it's still up and standing. So it turned out to be about roughly a little over 13 feet tall and around 45 feet long. That's the first of the arrays, and we have to build 2 more. So it takes up a lot of real estate, and this thought that if you have a couple solar panels and they're flexible and you fold them out, like a little suitcase you carry around, you fold them out and you're going to run your house on it, that's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense, because ours is roughly 13 feet by 45. That's one. We have another array that's a little smaller than that, and those 2 of them together can almost run the farm, but not quite. And that's during, great sunny days. So the bottom line is the answer to, because we're dependent on electricity, the bottom line is you're not going to be able to have enough fuel unless you have a natural gas, well on your property and you can take natural gas, for, free energy. Unless you can do that, if you're going to have to rely on diesel or propane or gasoline, you're not going to have enough fuel. We don't have enough fuel either. No one does. And the equipment will not last forever. The longest running generator I know of is 8,000 hours. And, so that roughly would be, let's say, 2 hours a day for a year, roughly 10 years. That's how long that would last. That's assuming nothing breaks. And, it takes a couple truck batteries to start one of those kind of things. So, will your lead acid batteries last long enough to start the generator? Because you're not going to be able to pull a rope and start a diesel generator. It's not going to happen. So it's a really complicated situation. We've painted ourselves into a corner, all of us, because of the dependence on electricity. Your stove, whether you have a propane stove, a natural gas stove, or an electric stove, they all run on electricity. All of them. If you had it in the last 20 years, they all run on electricity. Even the broiling element, the baking element, even the gas, it requires electricity to run. So we're kind of in a pickle. And the best you can do is ride out the rough spots, and hopefully we'll be able to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, and some of the grid will return after the next Carrington event. Dr. Shealy, any thoughts, questions, comments, concerns?
No, I think everybody needs to tackle this and make plans.
And Dr. Shealy, frankly, I cannot see any way of getting through what we're facing without being remote from a city. Being in a city is like the worst possible thing that a person could do. Now, during great times, when the money's flowing, that's where you want to be. I mean, that's where you can make your fortune. You can make a lot of money in the city, and you can't make it in the country. But when times get bad, the place to be is in the country. Your thoughts?
Absolutely. I agree with you totally. I think every human being, whether they live in a city or on a farm, need to make decisions about how and when and where and all that.
Mm-hmm. And I believe it should be a family decision. I believe that you need to turn the television off. I believe you need to turn the television off. You need to put the phones in another room and silence them and say, okay, for the next 1, 2, 3 hours, every night this week for dinner, here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to have a person be the secretary. That person is going to take the notes and write down what we like, what we don't like, about what could happen if, when the grid goes down again, when there's electric power failure. What do we not like being without? Okay. And is it practical to have that going forward? Or is there a substitute? And if we want to buy more of it, how long will it last before, bugs develop in it? Whether it's, flour or pasta or, whatever it is. How long will it last before it goes bad? And where are we going to store it? And does everybody know how to shut off the electricity? Does everybody know where the electrical panel is? Does everybody know how the well works? Do we have any spare parts for the well? Do we have any spare parts for the generator? Do we have an extra air filter for it? Do we have a quart of oil per day of runtime? So every 24 hours you run that generator, do you have another quart of oil? Or 2 quarts, depending on how much it takes. Because your generator is going to need an oil change every 24 hours. If you have one of those, 10 horsepower or less generators. Because they don't have oil filters. You're going to have to change the oil. And you have to have the right oil. And the oil that you need is diesel engine oil. In my opinion, diesel engine oil is what you need, not gasoline engine oil. You need diesel engine oil because it has more of the additives to protect that air-cooled engine. Now, you can look it up and check me out. Don't believe a word I say, Glass, but that's what we do here at the farm. It's interesting, Dr. Shealy. It's this thing about the engine oil is a big deal because back in the, 1960s, there were additives in the engine oil that you'd buy for your car that have been removed since the 1960s and the 1970s. And the idea was that the EPA said, well, you all can't have those additives because they are destructive to the environment. So instead of having oil that will last or keep the engines lasting a long time, the additives have been taken out. The phosphorus and the zinc have been taken out of the engine oil. And because when you recycle your engine oil and you bring it back to Walmart or O'Reilly's or AutoZone or Pep Boys or wherever you bring it back for recycling, they sell it. And they sell it to big ships, ocean-going cruise liners, for example. And they use it as fuel. So they take the oil that you drained out of your crankcase and they burn it. They burn it with a flame. They burn it. And that heat runs those big ships. Well, that oil with the additives goes right up into the air. So you haven't polluted the air with the engine oil. They have. And you've given them the oil for free to do it. Okay? So to prevent them from polluting more, they've taken the EPA has required the reduction in the additives of your engine oil so your engines will fail sooner. So if you use the regular gasoline engine oil in your gasoline generator, you will destroy the engine faster than if you use diesel engine oil, because they haven't taken all the additives out of the diesel, or as much of the additives out of the diesel engine oil as they had out of the gasoline engine oil. So the bottom line, I'm going to tell you what to do or what to consider. Chevron makes one, Mobil makes one, Chevron Delo, Mobil Delvac, Delvac, or Shell's Rotella. And the viscosity is 15W40, 15W40. That's what you want, in my opinion. But do your own research. So here we are, Dr. Shealy. We're in a situation where food is going to be difficult, electricity is going to be difficult, energy is going to be difficult, sanitation is going to be difficult, water is going to be difficult. Everything we can think of is going to be difficult. I can't see it getting any better. I really can't.
Well, here is a place where being prepared is more important than ever before.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. And more, as I look at our ratings on the internet, more and more people are paying attention to what we're saying than ever before. Literally, more and more people are paying attention because they haven't been thinking about these things as much as they should have been. And for example, if you wanted to go and buy soap, a bar of soap, it's not all that easy anymore. I mean, you can get it at Sam's Club right now. You can get it, but you can't get all you want. You used to be able to in the good old days, but not anymore. So even soap is difficult. And that was one of the questions I had for you, Dr. Shealy. Soap. We used to use, when I was growing up, there were two kinds of soap in our household. One was brown soap and the other was white soap. The brown soap was, if you got really dirty and you're working on a car or something, you'd use, the brown Fels Naphtha or Octagon and washing soap, I guess it was called. And it was, more caustic and had lye in it, and they did a better job. But it was rough on the skin. The other soap was ivory soap. That's the only two kinds we had. And I hated ivory soap. I really did. But something about it I didn't like. But that was it. And now we have hand soap that's liquid, and we have the antibacterial and the standard, like the white versus the pink or antibacterial. What are your thoughts about using antibacterial liquid soap versus just plain liquid soap or just plain hand soap?
I use plain hand soap. I do not use antibacterial hand soap. But I use the plain, it looks like water.
Okay. So so you use liquid or do you use a bar?
Liquid.
Okay.
I like the liquid.
The reason I'm asking that the purpose of soap is to reduce the surface tension. So whatever it is that you've got on your skin will slide right off. Okay. Kind of like lubricates to the point where the bacteria, the viruses, whatever you've got, dirt, grease, grime, can't hang on any longer because the surface tension has been removed to the point where those things that you want to wash off your skin slide right off. They can't hang on. And that's the purpose of soap. Now, soap has been modified to do all kinds of things, antiperspirant, all kinds of additives. And I think what I just heard Dr. Shealy say is forget all that stuff and just go with soap. Do what soap was supposed to do and reduce the surface tension so the dirt and grime and bacteria and fungi just slide right off and go down the drain. Did I get that right?
You got it.
Okay. I looked up the price of brown soap. I couldn't believe it. You know, Dr. Shealy, seriously, it was maybe 39 cents a bar when I was growing up. It's about 10 times that now.
Wow.
10 times more expensive. And the bars went from 8 ounces to 5 ounces, and they still increased the price 10 times. So we're talking roughly $5 a bar for brown soap. $5 a bar. That's crazy. Absolutely crazy. I've got some more questions for Dr. Shealy. We talked about the greatest concern. And I have some questions about splinters. And why is it that splinters seem to, you get one, you go, oh, let me get it. I get it later. I'll get it in an hour. And then an hour later, that darn thing has gone farther beneath the skin than it was when it first went in. That's one question. And do we have to get splinters out? And the next question is drinking alcohol with meds. Dr. Norm Shealy's with us, normshealy.com, normshealy.com. And that's the website for your vitamins, mineral supplements, and Dr. Shealy's books. Dr. Shealy, over the weekend, I was working with some wood, and I was modifying the desk that I use for broadcasting. And I need to make it a little larger so I could push the computers even farther back from the monitors, back from where I sit. Yeah. And so I made it 67 by 40 inches. I'm making a new top for this desk. And so I got a splinter, and, I get lots of splinters being a farmer. And I have a dental pick that I sterilize with hydrogen peroxide, before I go doing, microscopic surgery to get splinters out. I've noticed over the years, Dr. Shealy, when I get a splinter, if I ignore it for a while, let's say, an hour or two, that darn thing, goes deeper. It doesn't come out. It goes farther in. Have you noticed that as well?
I have to say, I don't have enough splinters to tell you the answer. I can't remember the last time I had one.
Okay. Well, I get them. I get them all the time because I'm, I think about it. Okay, I can put some gloves on it. No, that'll take like another 20 seconds. So sometimes I don't put gloves on when I handle wood, and I go, I know I'm going to get a splinter. I got a splinter. So, I use a dental pick, and then I use, to get it out. Sometimes I modified a pair of, tweezers. And these are eyebrow tweezers from probably the 1960s or 1950s. And I sharpen them with a hand sharpening stone so they're really, really flat, and so that the edges line up perfectly, so I can get little tiny things like these, like microscopic ticks, and I can pull splinters out and that kind of thing. But I've got to expose the splinter, and I use a dental pick that I've sterilized, and sterilize the tweezers with hydrogen peroxide. What happens if we leave something like a splinter and say, the heck with it, just leave it there?
Well,
Let's say it's just wood.
It's going to depend on your entire immune system, but obviously, even if there are no germs there, you've got a foreign material. It has no similarity to your own tissue. So it's going to cause a reaction of rejection, if you will, of a foreign invader. And that always opens the opportunity for an additional infection of any kind because there's so many openings in the skin.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So then the next question is, and I've asked this before, there was a guy who was hosting a television show about an Egyptian tomb. They found this new tomb, and there was a television personality, and they said, okay, look, tomorrow we're going to go in this tomb. So whatever you do, don't shave. Don't shave. Do not shave. And so the television personality is ready to go in the next day, and they're videoing it, and they go, like, don't you remember I said don't shave? And the reason that the host said the archaeologist said do not shave is because we're going into this unopened tomb, and there's all kinds of bacteria in there, and we have no idea what the reaction to the body is. So don't make any more openings than you have to. So don't shave, don't cut yourself, don't expose your body. How is that similar or different, or is it irrelevant to going out in public when you could be exposed to COVID-19? Shave, don't shave. What are your thoughts?
Well, as far as shaving, I don't think it matters. I don't know what percentage of men use cutting razors today versus electric razors. but I suspect it's a majority still use electric razor. And you don't cut the skin nearly as often with an electric razor as you do with a regular blade. But I don't think we need to worry about ordinary viruses with shaving. They don't. It doesn't affect the skin itself as much as it affects the nasal and breathing tissues.
Okay, so the sinuses, nasal, lungs, throat, etc.
Yeah.
Okay. I had another question about nasal flushing. So when I go and I get myself in moldy areas where there's hay and so forth, I use saline solution. You get it at the Chinese factory outlet, and I put a couple drops of colloidal silver in there. So like a 2-ounce little spray bottle that you buy for $2 at Walmart. And I add a couple drops of colloidal silver, shake it up, and I use that. So when I get into one of those moldy, dusty areas, I flush out my sinuses immediately after, as soon as I leave there, I flush out. I don't want to go in there in the first place, but if I do, I will flush out. What are your thoughts about mixing saline with a couple drops of colloidal silver as a sinus flush?
Definitely. Go for it.
Okay. Last quick question. Taking vitamins, minerals, supplements, and or medication with water versus a beer?
No. Period.
Okay.
Not wise.
Okay. So medicines, vitamins, minerals, supplements, water only?
Only.
There you go. Okay. So class, as tempting as it may be, sit back and take your vitamins, minerals, supplements, and meds with a beer. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Dr. Shealy, thanks so much for being with us.
Always great.
It's always a blast. It's always a blast being on the air with Dr. Shealy. Again, thank you so much for spending your time with us teaching our class, Dr. Shealy. NormShealy.com. We'll be back tomorrow.